My fork, laden with Thanksgiving turkey, never reached my lips. A small, folded napkin slid under the table toward me, pushed by my granddaughter's tiny, trembling hand. I smiled, thinking it was one of her usual sweet doodles, filled with hearts and flowers. But when I unfolded it, the world tilted, my stomach plummeted. Grandma, pretend you're sick and get out now. The shaky blue ink seemed to burn into my soul. For a moment, I couldn't draw a breath. I just stared at those impossible words. Then my eyes flicked to the other end of the table. My son, his wife, Melissa, and her parents were there, laughing too loudly, clinking wine glasses in a toast I hadn't even registered. But something in my granddaughter's face wide, terrified, pleading demanded my immediate obedience. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was not a game. I gently set my fork down, pressing a hand to my chest. I'm not feeling too well, I murmured, my voice raspy. The boisterous conversation died. All eyes swung to me. Oh, Mom? Really, my son said. That familiar, dismissive tone, lacing his voice, the one people use when they're annoyed rather than concerned. It's Thanksgiving. Melissa leaned in, whispering something I couldn't quite catch. But the smug smirk playing on her lips spoke volumes. It told me everything I needed to know about their true feelings. I think I'll just go home and rest, I managed, quietly. It's been a long day. Not one person offered to help me up. Not my son. Not Melissa. Not her parents who'd been so charming all evening. Only my granddaughter. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the polished hardwood. I'll walk Grandma to the car. Melissa started to protest. Sweetie, we haven't even had dessert yet. But my granddaughter's voice shook. Please. Just for a minute. That's when the knot of dread tightened in my chest. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. My son waved a hand dismissively. Fine. Fine. Hurry back. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else as I slowly stood, steadying myself against the table. The room suddenly felt suffocatingly warm. Too bright. Too loud. Their eyes were on my back as I walked toward the door, my granddaughter's small hand gripping mine like a lifeline. The night air hit me with the force of a physical blow, cold, sharp, and brutally real. My granddaughter didn't let go. Her fingers were ice cold and trembling. Grandma, she whispered, glancing back at the house, her voice barely audible. They were talking about you before dinner. My heart hammered against my ribs. What do you mean? Sweetheart, they said after tonight, you wouldn't be living alone anymore. Her voice cracked, a tiny fissure in the growing dam of my composure. They said they found papers that you signed something about your house. I stopped dead. Right there by the mailbox. The flickering streetlight cast long, dancing shadows around us. Papers, I repeated the word alien on my tongue. What papers? She nodded, tears welling. They said, you're forgetful now, that you don't know what you're doing anymore. But you're not forgetful. Grandma, I know you're not. I stood frozen, breath clouding in the cold November air. In that moment, under that unreliable light, with my granddaughter crying beside me, a single, terrifying thought echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Tell me everything, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, though a tremor ran through my soul. What exactly did you hear? My granddaughter wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looking so small in her thin cardigan. Shivering. I was in the hallway before dinner, she began. I heard Dad and Mom talking in the kitchen with Grandpa Ron and Grandma Linda. They didn't know I was there. I nodded, urging her to continue. Dad said something about a medical evaluation that they had already done. Mom laughed and said, "You didn't even know it happened." Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then Grandpa Ron said the notary was coming after dessert. That once you signed the papers tonight, everything would be settled. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. A medical evaluation, a notary coming to my son's house. Did they say what the papers were for? I asked. Already knowing the answer deep down. She nodded slowly. Your house. They kept saying, the property and the asset. Mom said once it was transferred, they could finally stop worrying about you being stubborn. Stubborn. That word struck me like a physical blow. I wasn't stubborn. I was independent. There's a crucial difference. A line they clearly couldn't see. And then my granddaughter continued, her voice breaking again. Mom said something about a nice facility. She said you'd be happier there. That you wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore. A facility? They wanted to put me in a home and seize my house. I looked back at the warm glow spilling from the dining room windows. Shadows moved inside. Laughing. Celebrating. They were celebrating me. Celebrating what they believed was already a done deal. Sweetheart, I said gently, kneeling, despite my aching knees. You did the right thing, telling me. You probably just saved my life. She threw her arms around my neck, and I held her tight, feeling the fierce protectiveness of a mother, a grandmother. This child, barely 10, possessed more courage and loyalty than her own parents. As I drove home that night, her buckled in beside me. My mind raced through the past few weeks. Suddenly, every unsettling detail clicked into place. The unexpected visits from my son and Melissa, always with that innocuous-looking folder of routine insurance documents. The way they'd started speaking to me was slower, as if I couldn't comprehend basic English. The subtle, insidious comments about my garden being overwhelming or my house being too much for me to handle alone. And then, a memory slammed into me last month. Melissa had insisted on accompanying me to a doctor's appointment. I'd seen it as kindness then. But the doctor had asked strange questions that day. Questions about my memory, the current year. And counting backward from 100, I'd laughed it off. Answered correctly. The doctor had seemed satisfied. But now, the chilling truth emerged. It wasn't a routine checkup. It was they building a case. Documenting my evaluation. Obtaining official records to use against me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Grandma, my granddaughter's voice broke through the fog of my thoughts. Are you okay? Yes. Baby, I said softly. But it was a lie. Because sitting there, driving down streets I'd known for 40 years, a painful realization twisted in my chest. My own son. The boy I'd raised, cherished, nurtured through fevers, and cheered for at every baseball game. He'd looked at me and seen nothing but dollar signs. He'd meticulously planned my future without a single word to me. He'd decided where I would live, what I would sign, what I would lose. They'd decided what to do with me while I was still alive. Still perfectly capable of making my own choices. And the most agonizing part, they'd almost gotten away with it. If not for a 10-year-old girl, a napkin, and a pen, I would have walked straight into their trap. After I dropped my granddaughter home, I drove back to my house alone. The silence in the car was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that precedes a momentous decision. A battle plan. Pulling into my driveway, I sat there for a moment. Engine off. Staring at the front porch light I'd left on. This house. My house. 40 years of memories soaked into every wall. Every floorboard. Every corner of every room. I walked inside and stood in the entryway. Truly seeing it for the first time in months. Maybe years. When you live somewhere for so long, it simply becomes background. But tonight, Every detail jumped out at me. The small dent in the hallway wall where my son, at 8, had crashed his bike indoors. I'd been furious. But then he cried, apologized, and I hugged him. That's what mothers do. The kitchen window above the sink where I used to stand, washing dishes, while my husband tinkered in the garage. I could still see him in my mind, humming off-key, covered in grease, happy. We'd bought this house together when we were young, naive, and barely afforded the down payment. It was smaller then, before the sunroom, before the finished basement, before we shaped it into the home we dreamed of on our wedding night. My husband had died 12 years ago. A sudden heart attack. One day here, the next gone. For months, I'd walked these rooms, expecting his voice, his presence, the scent of his morning coffee. The grief had been unbearable, but I'd stayed. I'd kept the house. I'd paid off the mortgage with his life insurance and my own savings. Every single payment had come from my hands, my work, my sacrifice. This wasn't just property. This was where I became a mother, where I'd buried my face in a pillow, crying after miscarriages, where I'd painted nurseries and stayed up all night with colicky babies, where I'd baked birthday cakes, sewn Halloween costumes, and created countless Christmas memories. I walked into my son's old bedroom, now a guest room. If I closed my eyes, I could still see his posters, his trophies, the messy clothes on the floor I'd nagged him about 1,000 times. He used to tell me he loved me every night, even as a teenager. Love you, Mom, he'd say. When did that boy vanish? When did he start seeing me as a burden instead of his mother? I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the crushing weight of it all pressing down. I remembered Melissa's first visit after they got engaged. She'd smiled politely, but I'd overheard her whispering to my son in the kitchen. It's so outdated. You'll definitely want to renovate before selling. Selling. Even then, even before they were married. She was already plotting my home's fate. And my son had just nodded in agreement. Over the years, the comments had grown bolder, more insistent. You really should downsize. Mom, this yard is too much work for someone your age. Wouldn't you be happier somewhere simpler? I'd brush them off. Laugh. Change the subject. But they were planting seeds, preparing me, wearing me down. Well, I wasn't worn down, not even close. I stood by the bed and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights cast a soft glow. I knew every house on this block. I'd watched children grow up, brought casseroles to new neighbors, and shoveled snow for Mrs. Patterson. This was my life, my home, my history, and they thought they could just take it, sign a few papers, and erase 40 years as if it meant nothing. Something hardened inside me. Not anger, not entirely. Something colder, more focused. Like tempered steel. They wanted my house. They'd have to drag me out. And even then, I'd ensure they'd inherit nothing but empty walls and bitter regret. I barely slept that night. My mind cycled back 2 weeks. All the pieces were there. I'd just been too blind, or perhaps too unwilling, to see them. It was a Tuesday, my grocery day. I'd just gotten home when my son's car pulled into the driveway. He'd brought Melissa, and they carried takeout from that Chinese place with the orange chicken I liked. Surprised, my son had grinned, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Thought we'd have lunch with you. I'd been genuinely pleased. They rarely stopped by unannounced. Life gets busy, I'd told myself. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd served Thanksgiving dinner just hours ago, where my granddaughter had slipped me that note. Melissa had been unusually chatty that day, complimenting my curtains, asking about my book club, and wondering if I'd been sleeping well. You look tired, Mom, my son had said. patting my hand. "Are you sure you're getting enough rest?" I'd laughed. "I'm 72. Dear. Tired comes with the territory." But he hadn't laughed back. Instead, he'd exchanged a glance with Melissa. One of those wordless, knowing looks married people share. "Actually, Mom, that's kind of why we're here." He'd continued. "We've been worried about you." Worried I'd set down my fork. Whatever for Melissa had leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We just think maybe living alone isn't the safest option anymore. You're not getting any younger." There it was. That infuriating phrase, "You're not getting any younger." As if I didn't know my own age. As if I didn't feel it in my bones every morning. "I'm perfectly fine," I'd said, keeping my tone light. "I've been managing this house for longer than you two have been married." My son pulled out a thick, official-looking folder. "We know, Mom. We know you're independent. But we've been looking into some options just to protect you. And well, to protect your assets." Assets, I'd repeated. "You mean my house? It's not just about the house." Melissa had quickly interjected. "It's about making sure everything is in order. Legal documents, power of attorney, healthcare directives, all the things people should have sorted out at your age." She'd slid the folder across the table. "We just need you to look these over. Sign where we've marked. It's all standard stuff. For your safety. For your safety." That phrase had rung hollow even then. Safety from what I'd lived in this house longer than most people stay married. I knew where every light switch was in the dark. Which floorboard creaked. Which cabinet stuck. I'd opened the folder and flipped through pages of dense legal jargon. Signature lines highlighted in yellow. "This seems like a lot," I'd said carefully. "Maybe I should have my own lawyer look at it first." The air in the room had chilled instantly. I felt it in the tightening of my son's jaw, in the way Melissa's practiced smile froze. "A lawyer," my son had said, a hint of anger in his voice. "Mom, we're family. We're trying to help you. Why would you need a lawyer? It's just sensible." I'd replied, unwavering. "Anytime someone asks you to sign legal documents, you should have them reviewed." Melissa had let out a short, sharp laugh. "Honestly, Mom, you're being paranoid. These are insurance forms. Medical directives. Nothing sinister." But I'd held firm. "I'll think about it." They'd left shortly after. The takeout containers still half full. Their smiles gone. My son had kissed my cheek mechanically at the door. "Don't take too long to think," he'd said, his voice laced with an implied threat. "These things have deadlines." I'd watch them drive away, feeling a lingering unease, something in the urgency of their visit, in the barely hidden frustration, had felt off. Now, sitting in my living room at 2 a.m, I understood completely. They hadn't needed my permission. They just needed my signature. And when I wouldn't give it willingly, they'd simply decide to obtain it another way. The medical evaluation my granddaughter mentioned, the notary they'd planned for Thanksgiving dinner, the papers they'd forge if necessary. They'd backed themselves into a corner with their greed. And now they were willing to do anything to get what they wanted: my house, my independence, my dignity. They thought I was an old woman they could manipulate, someone too tired, confused, or lonely to fight back. They were wrong. I didn't go back to bed. There was no point. My mind was too awake, too sharply focused. Instead, I made a pot of tea and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. Old-fashioned, I know, but I've always thought better with a pen in my hand. I wrote down everything, every visit, every comment, every attempt to push those papers, every strange question that the doctor had asked during what I'd believed was a routine appointment. By the time the sun came up, I had 3 pages filled front and back, and a formidable plan. At 9 sharp, I called my granddaughter's cell phone. a device her mother had given her mostly for tracking, which I now blessed. "Grandma," she answered, her voice quiet. She was probably at school. "Sweetheart, I need your help today. Can you tell your mother you're not feeling well? That you need to come stay with me?" There was a brief pause. Then, "Yes, I can do that." Smart girl. She didn't ask questions. She just trusted me. An hour later, she was sitting in my passenger seat as I drove downtown. She'd brought her backpack and told her mother she had a headache. Melissa hadn't even argued, probably relieved to have her out of the way. "Where are we going?" my granddaughter asked, her eyes wide with a mix of apprehension and adventure. "First, the bank," I said. "Then to see a lawyer." Her eyes widened even further. Really. The bank was quiet that morning. Mr. Peters, the branch manager, had known me for almost 20 years. He'd helped me refinance after my husband died, patient and kind when I'd sat in his office, openly weeping over paperwork I couldn't comprehend. When I walked in with my granddaughter, he smiled and waved us toward his desk. "Mrs. Harrison," he said warmly. "Good to see you. What can I help you with today?" I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. "I need to make some changes to my accounts. Security measures." His smile faded slightly. "Is everything all right?" "Not exactly," I said. "I have reason to believe someone may try to access my accounts without my permission." "Family members?" He nodded slowly, his expression serious. "I see. That happens more often than you'd think. Unfortunately, I want to add additional security." I pressed on. "Passwords, verification questions, and I want to make sure that no one, and I mean no one, can make changes or withdrawals without me physically being present with identification." Mr. Peters pulled out some forms. "We can absolutely do that. I'll set up what we call enhanced authentication. It means even with power of attorney documents, which I assume is what you're worried about, nothing can happen without your explicit, in-person consent." A monumental weight lifted from my chest. "Thank you." Mr. Peters leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Mrs. Harrison, may I ask? Are you safe? Do you feel threatened?" I glanced at my granddaughter, sitting quietly beside me, then back at him. "I'm not in physical danger, but someone is trying to take advantage of me financially." He handed me a business card. "This is our elder protection specialist. She works with seniors dealing with financial exploitation. She can help you understand your rights and options." I tucked the card into my purse. I'm already one step ahead. "I have a lawyer's appointment this afternoon." He smiled this time, with something like genuine respect. "Good. You're doing everything right." After we left the bank, I took my granddaughter to lunch at a small diner near the courthouse. She ordered pancakes, even though it was noon, and I didn't say a word. Sometimes, rules are meant to be broken. "Are you scared?" she asked me between bites. "A little," I admitted, meeting her gaze. "But mostly, I'm angry, and anger, when you use it right, can be a powerful force." At 2:00, we walked into the law office of Catherine Mills, an attorney my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had highly recommended. Catherine was younger than I expected, perhaps 50, with short gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind black-rimmed glasses. She listened to my entire story without interrupting. I showed her the notes I'd written, the meticulous timeline, the attempted documents, and described the medical evaluation I hadn't consented to, the notary they'd planned for Thanksgiving. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. "Mrs. Harrison, what you're describing is textbook elder financial abuse. Possibly even attempted fraud if they forged your signature. Can you help me?" I asked. my voice holding a desperate plea. She smiled then. Not a friendly smile, but a warrior's smile. Absolutely. First, we're going to create a revocable living trust. We'll transfer your home and major assets into it. That means even if they somehow got power of attorney documents, they couldn't touch anything. The trust protects you entirely. How long will that take? I asked. A flicker of hope igniting within me. If we move fast, a week, maybe less. She looked at my granddaughter. And you? Young lady, you're very brave. What you did might have saved your grandmother from losing everything. My granddaughter blushed but sat up straighter, a quiet pride in her posture. Catherine pulled out a legal pad. I'm going to need you to tell me exactly what you heard that night. Every word you can remember. You're a witness. And that matters profoundly. For the next hour, my granddaughter recounted everything: the overheard conversations, the names, the timeline. Catherine transcribed it all. When we finally stood to leave, she walked us to the door and placed a hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Harrison, I want you to know something. People like your son and his wife count on you being too scared or too ashamed to fight back. They count on you staying quiet. I'm done being quiet, I stated, a newfound steel in my voice. She grinned. Good. Because we're going to make sure they never touch what's yours again. 3 days later, my phone rang. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I saw his name on the screen. I let it ring twice more before answering, steadying my voice. Hello, Mom. My son's voice was tight, strained. We need to talk. Of course. Dear. How are you? How am I? He let out a bitter laugh. I'm confused. Actually, Melissa's parents were really upset about Thanksgiving. You just left without saying goodbye. Without even finishing dinner. I stirred the pot on the stove, keeping my tone light. I wasn't feeling well. I thought I mentioned that. You could have stayed. We would have taken care of you. Taken care of me. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I'm fine now, I said. Just needed some rest. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing. Frustrated. Struggling for the right words. Listen, Mom. About the other thing. The paperwork we discussed. What paperwork? I asked. Opening the fridge. Pulling out vegetables with calm, steady hands. Oh. Those? Yes. I've been thinking. His tone shifted, becoming sharper. And I'm still considering my options. Mom. We don't have time for this. There it was. The impatience, thinly veiled, finally broke through. These things have deadlines. Legal windows. If we don't get this sorted out soon, it becomes much more complicated. Complicated for whom, I asked. A dangerous quiet in my voice. Silence. For you, he said finally. For your protection. We're trying to help you. I wanted to laugh. To scream. To ask him when he'd stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a problem to solve. An obstacle to be moved. But I didn't. I kept my voice calm. I appreciate your concern. Do you? His voice rose slightly. Because honestly, Mom, it doesn't feel like it. We've been trying to help you for months. And you keep pushing back. It's like you don't trust us. Should I? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Another pause. Longer this time. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Dear. I'm just tired. He sighed heavily. Look. The notary we had lined up for Thanksgiving. He's willing to come by your house this week. Wednesday afternoon? It'll take 20 minutes tops. Just sign the papers. And we can all move forward. What exactly am I signing? I asked. My voice deceptively innocent. We've been over this. He snapped. Power of attorney. Medical directives. Property transfer into a family trust. Standard stuff for someone your age. Someone your age. There it was again. The condescension. The dismissive label. And if I don't want to sign, his voice went cold, chilling me more than any open threat. Then we'll have to pursue other options. Legal options. We already have the medical evaluation showing you're experiencing cognitive decline. We have documented evidence of forgetfulness and poor judgment. If you won't do this voluntarily, we can have you declared incompetent. My hand tightened around the phone. But instead of fear, I felt a surge of clarity, of certainty. I see, I said quietly, letting a hint of resignation creep into my tone. Mom, we don't want it to come to that. Just sign the papers. Make this easy. Who's the lawyer helping you with this? I asked. Maintaining the facade. You mentioned Melissa's cousin. Yeah. Richard. He specializes in elder law. He says this is the best way to protect your assets from nursing home costs down the line. Nursing home costs, they'd already decided my fate. Where I'd end up. Well, I said, injecting a weary resignation into my voice. I suppose you're right. I have been feeling forgetful lately. I could practically hear him relax on the other end. His guard dropping. See. That's good. Mom. That's really good. So, Wednesday works. Let me check my calendar and call you back. Don't take too long. Richard says the window for doing this voluntarily closes soon. I understand. Good. His voice warmed slightly, adopting that sickeningly false affection again. I'm glad you finally understand. We're doing this because we love you. I looked out the window at the garden I'd planted, the trees I'd watched grow, the home I'd built with my own hands. Yes, I said softly. I understand perfectly. After I hung up, I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, then immediately called Catherine Mills. They're planning to come on Wednesday, I told her, my voice clear and steady, with forged documents and threats. Perfect, she said, her voice brimming with a quiet confidence. By Wednesday, your trust will be filed and recorded. Let them come. Let them try. They didn't even wait until Wednesday. On Monday afternoon, I heard a car door slam in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw my son's silver sedan. He and Melissa, both dressed in business casual. She was carrying that same thick folder. They were coming to ambush me, to catch me off guard. I almost smiled. I opened the door before they could even knock. This is a surprise. My son looked uncomfortable. Hey. Mom. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by. Save you a trip on Wednesday. How thoughtful, I said, stepping aside. My tone as sweet as poison. Come in. They walked past me into the living room. Melissa set her purse and the folder on the coffee table with a soft thud. We brought the documents, she said brightly, her voice brittle. Richard looked everything over. All you need to do is sign and initial in a few places, and we're all set. Would you like some tea? I asked, deliberately slowing the pace. My son waved his hand dismissively. We're fine. Mom, let's just get this done. I sat down in my armchair, the one my husband used to read the newspaper on every Sunday morning. They sat on the couch across from me, the coffee table between us, a silent battlefield. Melissa opened the folder, spreading several documents out, pages and pages of legal text. Signature lines marked with little colored tabs. This one is the power of attorney, she explained, pointing. This gives us authority to handle your finances and make medical decisions if you're unable to. And this one, my son continued, sliding another document forward, transfers the house into a family trust for estate planning purposes. To avoid probate, I picked up the first document, pretending to read it, allowing them to believe I was considering their terms. It's a lot to take in, I said slowly, weighing my words. We know, Melissa said, her voice syrupy sweet. That's why we're here to help. To explain anything you don't understand. I set the papers down and looked at them both. Truly looked at them. My son avoided my gaze. Melissa offered that practiced. Artificial smile. Before I sign anything, I said, a quiet steel in my voice. I have a question. Of course. My son said, his face a mask of feigned helpfulness. When were you planning to tell me about the medical evaluation? His face went instantly pale. What medical evaluation? Melissa snapped. Her voice too high. Too defensive. Betraying her. The one you arranged without my knowledge. I continued, leaning forward slightly. The one where the doctor asked me all those questions about my memory. My cognitive function. The one you're planning to use to prove I'm incompetent if I don't sign these papers willingly. The silence in the room was deafening. Suffocating. Mom. I don't know what you're talking about. My son started. But I held up my hand, stopping him cold. Please don't insult my intelligence. Melissa's smile vanished. Look. We were just trying to be thorough. To make sure you were okay. To build a case against me. You mean? My son stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you. And you're acting paranoid. Sit down. I said quietly. Something in my tone made him pause. Made him hesitate. Then slowly sink back onto the couch. I reached beside my chair and pulled out my own folder. Thicker than theirs. I set it on the coffee table between us. What's that? Melissa asked. Her eyes narrowed. Suspicious. Legal filings I made last week. I said calmly. With my attorney. My son's jaw tightened. What attorney? Catherine Mills. Perhaps you've heard of her. She specializes in elder law. Specifically protecting seniors from financial exploitation. I opened the folder and slid a document toward them. This is a revocable living trust. My house. My savings. My assets. They're all protected now. Even if you somehow manage to get power of attorney, you can't touch any of it. Melissa snatched up the document. Her eyes scanning frantically. You can't do this without consulting us. Actually, I can. I countered. My voice steady. Powerful. It's my property. My money. My life. But we're family. My son pleaded, his voice cracking. The false bravado gone. Family doesn't forge signatures. I replied, my gaze unblinking. Family doesn't try to have their mother declared incompetent so they can steal her home. We weren't stealing anything, Melissa snapped. But her hands were shaking. Betrayals of her composure. We were protecting your assets. I pulled out another paper. This is interesting. It's a report from a handwriting analyst. She compared the signatures you submitted to the county last month with my actual signature. My son's face went from pale to a sickly gray. Turns out they don't match. I continued, savoring each word, which means you attempted fraud, forgery, both of which are crimes. We didn't forge anything, Melissa insisted. But her voice was a desperate whisper now. Then explain how documents with my supposed signature were filed at the county recorder's office when I never signed them. When I never even saw them. They looked at each other. Cornered. Trapped. My attorney has copies of everything, I said. The forged documents. The medical evaluation I didn't consent to. The timeline of your visits and attempts to manipulate me. I paused, letting the implications sink in. And she has a witness statement from someone who overheard you planning all of this. Who? My son demanded. A desperate edge to his voice. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Melissa stood abruptly. This is insane. We were trying to help you. Help yourselves. Maybe. I stood too. Walked to the door. And opened it wide. I think it's time for you to leave. Mom, my son cried. His voice now pleading. Disparate. Don't do this. We can work something out. We could have. I said, my voice quiet but firm. If you'd asked instead of plotted. If you'd treated me like a person instead of an obstacle. Melissa grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. My son followed more slowly, looking back at me with a desperate mix of anger and defeat. At the doorway, he stopped. You're making a mistake. No, I said quietly, meeting his gaze with unyielding strength. You made the mistake. You should have known better than to underestimate me. They left without another word. The door closed behind them with a soft click. I stood there for a moment, listening to their car start and pull away, then walked back to my chair, sat down, and let out a long, slow breath. It was done. The house felt different after they left. Quieter. Yes, but not in a lonely way. In a peaceful, reclaimed way. I called my granddaughter that evening and asked if she could come stay the night. Her mother agreed without hesitation, probably relieved to have her out of the house while they dealt with their humiliation. When she arrived with her overnight bag, I had hot cocoa waiting on the stove. The kind with real milk and melted chocolate, not the powder from a packet. We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from our mugs, the comfortable silence a balm to my raw nerves. Did they come? She asked, her eyes serious. They came, I confirmed. What happened? I reached across and squeezed her hand. You saved me. That's what happened. Everything I was able to do, I did because you warned me that night. She looked down at her cocoa. I was so scared. I thought maybe I shouldn't say anything. That maybe I heard wrong. But you trusted your instincts. That's brave. Are you mad at them? She asked, looking up at me with those wide, earnest eyes. I thought about that for a moment. Truly considered it. No, I said finally. I'm not mad. I'm disappointed. And disappointment is different from anger. Anger burns hot and fades. But disappointment, that stays. It changes how you see someone. She nodded slowly, processing that profound truth. Will they come back? They might try. I said, but if they do, my attorney will handle it. I don't have to fight them face to face anymore. The law will do that for me. She sipped her cocoa, a small mustache of chocolate forming on her upper lip. I reached over with a napkin and gently wiped it away. And for a moment, we both simply smiled. That night, she slept in the guest room, and I slept better than I had in weeks. The letters started arriving about a week later. First, from their attorney, Richard, a formal demand for reconsideration of family property distribution. My attorney, Catherine, responded with an equally formal letter, explaining there was nothing to reconsider. The property was legally protected, and any further harassment would result in a restraining order. Then came a letter from my son, handwritten, 3 pages of how hurt he was, how I'd misunderstood their intentions, how they were only trying to help. I read it once and filed it away. Didn't respond. 2 weeks after that, they showed up at church. I saw them walk in during the opening hymn, sliding into a pew near the back. Melissa had her hand on my son's arm, both in their Sunday best, wearing their most pious expressions. After the service, they tried to approach me in the fellowship hall. My son opened his mouth to speak, but I simply smiled, took my granddaughter's hand, and walked past them without a word. People notice things in small communities. Whispers start. Why doesn't she talk to her son anymore? Did you hear what they tried to do? Can you imagine your own mother? I never said a word against them. I never had to. The truth has a way of getting out all on its own. A month passed. Then 2. Their calls stopped. The letters stopped. They realized, finally, that there was nothing left to take. Nothing left to manipulate. Last night, I stood by my bedroom window, looking out over the backyard. The garden needed weeding. The fence needed painting. All the little tasks that come with owning a home. But they were my tasks. My home. My choice. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from my granddaughter. "Good night. Grandma, I love you. I'm glad you're safe." I typed back slowly, my old fingers clumsy on the small keyboard. "Because of you, I am." When I turned off the light and climbed into bed, I thought about everything that had happened, how agonizingly close I'd come to losing it all. Not just the house, but my independence, my dignity, my right to live my own life on my own terms. For years, I'd believed that family was everything, that blood ties were unbreakable, that love would always protect. But I learned something profoundly important these past few months. Sometimes the people who truly love you most aren't the ones you're related to. Sometimes it's a 10-year-old girl with a napkin and the courage to tell the truth. And sometimes, survival isn't about fighting back loud and hard. Sometimes it's about being smart, being prepared, knowing when to walk away, and when to stand your ground, fiercely and quietly. I thought revenge would feel explosive, satisfying in some dramatic, cinematic way. But it didn't. It felt like silence. The kind of profound silence that comes after a storm, when the wind stops howling and the rain stops falling, and you realize you're still standing, still here, still home. Before I go, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to stand up to family in a way you never expected? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, if it made you think or feel something, please do me a favor, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because life has taught me that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. And your voice matters, too. Good night, and thank you for listening.